When I was a kid, I lived in a fairly small town that was mostly just made up of a few grocery stores, a couple of fast food places, and a crap ton of townhomes. When my family first moved in there, it was fairly empty. Our neighborhood was pretty much the first out of a few townhomes and condo complexes to be built in that part of the vast expanse of fields. Now, this area wasn't rural by any means. There were farms and all, and quite a bit of wildlife that ran through the occasion. It was located next to a quickly growing city and a highway that ran right through the center, which led to surrounding cities and a freeway intersection. Anyway, due to the fairly new town's growth, an elementary school had just been built to accommodate the growing population. I was one of the first people to go there when it first opened, and even then what would become of sixth grade classrooms were still being finished when the first school year started. Because this school was so new, it had a lot of new security features such as thicker glass for each window, better locks on doors, heavier doors, nice cameras at every entrance and exit, as well as automatic locks that had to be unlocked from the inside of the office or via a key card. What I was trying to get at was this town wasn't very big and not a lot happened here. Plus, the school was pretty secure, so nobody really thought anything bad would or could happen. I remember starting from kindergarten and up, the school would have routine lockdown checks, fire and earthquake drills, etc. Before I thought it was kind of fun, not realizing the importance of them, or really why we did them at all. So before I didn't really take them seriously. That was until one day in third grade, when I'd been going here for about 4 years. I remember it was a day like any other. I went inside, went up to my classroom with my backpack and my cubby, and then went to sit at my desk until class started. Then there was an announcement over the intercom. Now, the drills always started with a warning about 5 minutes beforehand, letting everyone in the school know what kind of drill would be happening. Then they'd start the drill. Generally with lockdown drills, we'd hear the words, "lockdown drill" over the intercom. The teachers would then hide us in the cubby closet, and would then cover up the windows with black pieces of cardstock after locking the door. But this particular day, however, there was no drill mentioned in the schedule. There was no warning before the intercom came on. All we heard were the words "lockdown" before the teacher got up to lock the door and cover the windows. Nothing too intense happened. No gunshots, no screaming, no banging on doors. It was quiet for what I think might have been 10 minutes or so. That was all until someone came to try and open the door. We could all hear the sound of a grown man's voice outside, along with the doorknob jiggling, but not opening. The thing that scared me about his voice wasn't the fact that we were hearing a grown man's voice outside the classroom. It was the fact that he seemed to be trying to make himself sound like a child. He was trying to make his voice sound higher than it was, and it chills me to the bone even now thinking about it. He was standing in the front door saying things like, "I'm scared, can you let me in?" Or, "I was told to go in here." Eventually, after a few more minutes of this and getting no response, he then moved on to the next classroom and continued the same routine. The cops finally came to arrest him then, and from what I've been told from some friends, he was either homeless or been in some kind of substance abuse for a while, and he had some kind of weapon on him. Rumors spread around the school with the guy snuffing with a gun. Other kids claimed he had a knife and threatened the office ladies. Some sixth graders thought it would be funny to tell little graders that some kid got hurt but was pulled out of school because of it. Other rumors ran around telling it was a janitor, but considering that the guy still works there to this day, I doubt that's the case. Either way, it was really scary, and I honestly really hope that now I don't ever have to deal with anything like that, ever again. It was 2018, and at the time I was 12, and although I can't remember the exact date this happened, I do remember it was around a month after the Parkland shootings. On the day it happened, I was transitioning to my next class, which was language arts. I arrived at the classroom early, and then sat down in my seat. Being one of the first people in the class, I never stopped to talk to any of my friends. Shortly after I sat down, the rest of the students came into class. The bell then rang, and class began. My teacher was yapping away, and before I knew it, we were well and truly into the lesson. However, this one bad kid named Miles, who always acted like a fool, was sitting right next to me. Surprisingly, he left me alone though, but he would usually always annoy me. And all of a sudden, around 30 minutes into the period, the intercom turned on. I paid no mind to it at first, since they would usually ask for people to come down to the office. But when the person over the line said, "This is not a drill, we are going into lockdown," my stomach immediately fell to the floor. Our principal, Mr. Anderson, who made the announcement, sounded very terrified, almost like he'd seen a ghost or something. I could then hear him frantically clicking buttons on the other end, specifically 3 buttons. At this point, I knew something wasn't right. I'd never heard my principal this worried before. He was always such a hard and stoic type of guy. I then thought to myself, something really bad is about to happen. Mr. Anderson then quickly ended the announcement and hung up. Everyone in the class stopped talking. It was dead silent. Not even Miles said a word. In fact, when I turned to look at him, his face had gone completely pale. My teacher, Miss Jones, then told us to immediately go to the corner of the room, while she made sure the classroom door was locked and put down the blinds on the door. Then my heart dropped. My class just so happened to be at the front of the school building. So while all this was happening, I managed to glance out the window and saw around 7 cop cars pull into the front of the building. They were all carrying huge assault rifles. My hands began to shake and I felt like I was dreaming. I felt like time started to slow down. Everything started to slow down. My best friend of 7 years at the time was at lunch during the lockdown. I started getting very paranoid, wondering if she was okay and safe. I felt like I was losing my mind and trapped in some kind of lucid dream, except it was real. I started derealizing, wondering if it was actually happening. Nothing felt real at all. The girl next to me whispered in my ear, "It's okay. If anything happens to us, my mom told me to carry this knife with me, for safety, so we'll be okay." Remembering this 5 years later really hurts me. The fact that a 12-year-old really had to say this is truly heartbreaking. I then opened Snapchat and looked at everyone's stories to try and get some confirmation on what was happening. My eyes then widened at the text that popped up on my screen. "There's a school shooter in the building," it read. At this point, I started to text my family about what was happening, telling them I wanted to go home and that I was scared. My mom immediately blew up my phone with messages, telling me to keep texting her so she knew I was okay. My older sister was in high school, which just so happened to be right across the street from our school, so she was also in lockdown texting my mom. About an hour later, the lockdown was finally lifted. It was my lunch period, but since the lockdown took up half the period, we only had about 15 minutes to eat. My friends and I then decided to go to the bathroom to try and see if we could find out what had happened. Since teachers would only let 2 girls in at a time, I stayed outside the bathroom and waited for my turn. But then something caught my eye. I saw a police officer walking down the hallway with a book bag in his hand and a student walking by his side. The student didn't look so happy to be with the officer. He didn't look at any other students in the hallway. He just stared at the floor. After my friends and I went to the bathroom, we walked back into the lunchroom where I told him what I'd just seen in the hallway. School then ended, and I then met up with my best friend on the bus. She told me what had happened during her lunch period. She told me there was this kid who was sitting at a table with his friends. His friends then made a joke that offended him. He told his friends he had a gun in his book bag, and that he would use it if they didn't stop. He then pulled it out and started waving it at his friends, screaming and yelling at them to stop. He then started shooting randomly in the air, and everyone fled the scene completely, leaving him alone in the cafeteria. Luckily, no one was hurt, and the cops arrested him quickly after the shots. But I still always wonder, what would have happened if he decided to turn it on to students? It started off as a normal day at school as most do. I was halfway into my junior year of high school and sitting in my first period Spanish class. I should probably give you the layout of the school so you can imagine how it was set up. My school is set up in a big X. In the very center, it splits off into 4 main halls. If you're standing in the middle in the commons looking forward, towards the front, that's where you will find the main office and administrative offices. On either side of those is 100 Hall to your right, and then 200 to your left. If you turn around, you'll see the cafeteria. On either side of the caf, you'll see the 400 to your right and the 300 to your left. Above the 100 is the 600 Hall. On top of the 200 is 700. And on top of the 400 is the 800. Confusing, right? All of the language classes were in the 700 Hall, and as soon as I got there, I immediately heard our frantic principal's voice over the intercom saying that we were going into full lockdown. He said the teachers and students should remain in their classrooms and behind locked doors. Everyone looked at each other in confusion, and my teacher had a worried look on her face. She then sped over to the door and locked it. After locking it, she looked back at all of us and said we needed to get in the corner of the room, now. I then stood up along with everyone else, and we all went over to the corner and sat down. Some girls then started crying, and I remember saying something along the lines of, "It's probably just a lockdown drill. About 15 minutes pass and there's no call that the lockdown is over. It's not a drill. Everyone was texting their friends asking if they were okay, and that's when we got the word that someone had taken their own life. The rumor spread around like wildfire, and soon everyone in the school knew about it. It was hard to 100% believe it, because sometimes people spread false information. A couple of hours go by and we got the word of a student's name, and to make matters worse, it was a girl in my class's boyfriend. She heard people talking about it in class, and she was bawling her eyes out. I was still inside the classroom with everyone else, and it finally hit 2 o'clock, and the lockdown was finally called off. All I wanted to do was just go home with my parents and just see them again. Everyone thought it was a tragic event that took place on campus grounds, and we truly felt for the kid. However, a week later we get a notification from the police department. It turns out he was planning on entering the school and opening fire on anyone he could. He took his father's AR-15 and pistol that morning and left a note for his parents to find. He then made his way to school, parked in the parking space, and sat in his car. However, his bad luck started when his mother came back to the house to grab something she left and found the note, and she immediately called the police. A few minutes after he arrived at school, a squad car pulled up in the parking lot. Fearing the worst, he did what he did. My friend then told me he talked to one of the cops there at the scene, and the cop told him he found a rifle and enough ammunition to supply the whole police department in the trunk. Many people who knew him denied that he would have done such a thing, but I truly believe he was planning a malicious attack. The motive was he wanted vengeance on those who bullied him. Even if this wasn't true, even if he didn't have a rifle on him, it's still scary to think what could have happened if his mom never found that note. That's what scares me every time I remember that day. Sometimes it keeps me up at night.